Okay, mikai. Aloha nui kākou. Mahalo nui au ko pakia pau ka ako ko adamai. O wau ke ia o Jacob Hauʻoli I kaika po o Hauʻoli Lorenzo-Elarco. Hanai ia wau e ka ua ki puʻupuʻu ma ka ʻaina mauna o Waimea. So, hello everybody. Mahalo nui for being here. My name is Hauʻoli and I come from Waimea, a place where I was raised by the Ki Puʻupuʻu rains as Craig shared. I first off want to mahalo. I have a list of everyone I got to mahalo, but I really want to mahalo my kupuna for this research would really not exist if it was not for their constant and consistent guidance. I really want to mahalo my kupuna, my tutu kuakahi, Dora, my Likawilo Kalani Ramiro. She was the last mana leo of our ohana. She passed away in 2014. And it was really my interactions with her that kind of set me on this course to reclaim ʻōlelo Hawaii in my ohana. A huge mahalo to Yeveke Kaualilinoe, which is the topic of this talk today. Huge mahalo to the Center of Biographical Research for this time and space for me to share this work to a wider public. This is the first time I'm kind of sharing about Kaualilinoe in English. I've had opportunity to share about him Maka ʻōlelo Hawaii, but this is a really awesome opportunity for me to share this in English, especially with my ohana that has arrived here today. So mahalo nui for to the center for creating this space. Also want to mahalo them for the biography prize as well, as we know that this is the first one to be to have won the prize, and it has been completely written Maka ʻōlelo Hawaii. So mahalo nui for that. A huge mahalo to, of course, my chair, Kumunoinoi Silva, who is here with us today. Aloha nui kaua e Kumunoinoi. The other committee members, Kahikina de Silva, Marie, Aloha Lenny Brown, and Kumulela Koga. Mahalo nui to you as well. Huge mahalo to Ome Kumu from Kamehameha, Kawaihuelani, and Kakaulo, Keʻelikōlani, and all of my other kumu in between. Mahalo nui. Big mahalo to my ohana, my family, my friends, colleagues, and my students that are here. They're here today and have supported me and continue to support me on this journey. And of course, mahalo to all of you who are in attendance. I know that this is a super busy time of the year, but mahalo nui for taking some time out to kind of listen to my talk. So mahalo nui ia ka hoʻea. Thank you guys for coming. As Craig mentioned, please put questions in the chat. If you have any questions, I'll leave it there, and at the end, we'll have a space and time to talk about it. All right, so let's get started. So a part of my introduction that I will generally always share, no matter where I am, is this phrase here, Hanai iau e ka ua ki puʻupuʻu. So this not only speaks to my hometown of Waimea and Hawaii Island, which is the best Waimea of all the other Waimeas, right? But it also refers to the famous rain, the ki puʻupuʻu rain of Waimea. And it talks about the rain itself being a huge part of my upbringing and my identity. So this one time I submitted this this bio to someone that asked for it, and they actually changed my bio, and they took that this A here, and they replaced it with an E. So grammatically speaking in Hawaiian, this small change really kind of alters my intended meaning. Here, E, of course, works. This E, right? It works. But it kind of says that I was raised on the rain of ki puʻupuʻu, as in I was given it to drink. And yes, this might be true, but here I intend it to be A instead. So this term A here makes the rain, the ki puʻupuʻu rain, the agent or the actor, the thing that is doing the action of hanai, right? So thus, this meaning that I'm trying to say here is that I was raised by the ki puʻupuʻu rain. It is the rain that raised me, and it continues to raise me. So for me, I truly feel that the cold slanted rain of Waimea has a huge part of raising me and shaping the way that I think and I interact with the world. So for me, hanai iau i ka ua ki puʻupuʻu. I take this metaphor as rain as a caretaker and a teacher, and I use that and I position that in this particular research that we'll look at today. Okay. So this brings us to Yeveke Kaualilinoe, which is the focus of my paper, the focus of my talk. This research comes from my MA thesis from Kawaihuelani Center for Hawaiian Language, which I completed in 2021. His name also talks about another rain name here in Hawaii, the Lilinoe rain. So today I'll be talking about him and the amazing and the awesome work that he has done. Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit about JWK Kaualilinoe, or I also say sometimes Yeveke Kaualilinoe. So I was first introduced to this writer Kaualilinoe in a class that I took with Kumu Marie Aloha Brown. So it's 2014. I'm in my last semester of my undergraduate. I'm just about to receive my BBA in business management and my BA in Hawaiian language, and I saw this flyer for this class. It's Religion 495, and it's the inaugural class of Kapo'e Mo'olakua, Hawaiian Reptilian Water Deities, and this book just recently came out. Amazing research by Kumu Aloha. So I thought to myself, hey, it's my last semester, let's try something different. So I never took a religion class before. I've never took a class with Kumu Aloha, but I decided to just jump in it. So the class again was about Hawaiian reptilian water deities. And in the class, I was assigned to lead the discussion on mo'o, found within the story Moolelo o Kamaakamahiai, written by JWK Kaualilinoe. So I did this really fantastic presentation and talked about some of the major themes, and we had a really nice discussion on the mo'o found within this story. Fast forward to 2017, so the year that I started my MA at Kawaihuelani, I'm sitting on a bus, okay, in the middle of Canada, and I'm reading this book. And the book just came out at that time, and it's The Power of the Steel Tip Pen, Reconstructing Native Hawaiian Intellectual History by Kumu Noinoe Silva. So I'm just amazed, right? The amazing rigor in which Kumu Noinoe sort of collects, analyzes, and shares the stories of these two Kanaka writers, Joseph Moku'ohai Poipoi and Joseph Kanepu'u. One of the things that really sticks out to me is this quote that Kumu Noinoe pulls to sort of emphasize the importance of examining Native Hawaiian intellectual history. So this quote here is in response to Mele and Mo'olelo being cut short from the newspapers. Joseph Kanepu'u writes in 1862 to the editor, asking to print all the songs, all the stories in full. He says it, and he ends this narrative, and he says, "E makemake ana ka hanau na Hawaii o na la umipumawalu kanahiku, a me na ade umipumawalu kanavalu, a me na ade umipumawalu kanaono, a me na ade umipumaiva kanaiva, kalamai." And Kumu Noinoe says generations of Hawaiian in 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, and 1890s and 1990s are going to want these, which are the mo'olelo and mele that are being cut. So Kanepu'u is asking, do not cut these, because the generations of the future is going to want this information. So I'm sitting here on the bus in the middle of Canada, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, Kanepu'u is talking about me, right? He is writing with this current contemporary generation in mind. And I was just so amazed at this kind of foresight and forward thinking that our kupuna had, right? So because of this particular sort of this foresight that our kupuna had, right? Kumu Noinoe calls this idea of mokuahau consciousness, which is this idea of committing to preserving knowledge for future generations. And I was so inspired to look a little bit deeper into this, and I wanted to explore more this concept of mokuahau consciousness, right? So I knew that this is something that I wanted to study, but I had no idea which author that I wanted to look at, right? So I kind of had a hard time choosing because there were so many amazing Kanaka intellectuals, right? So I kind of went down this huge rabbit hole, pouring through the different columns of Hawaiian language newspapers, pulling out Mo'olelo and then finding their author. And then on one rainy day, I remember this, it was a rainy day, I sat in my office at Honolulu Community College at my desk, which used to belong to the late Kumu Edith Mackenzie. So I'm sitting there, right? And I come across my old presentation on Kamaakamahiai. I go through my presentation. I remember I never mentioned anything about Kaualilinoe. I just mentioned his name. So from that moment, that was a big aha moment for me. And I said, the author of my focus is going to be JWK Kaualilinoe. Okay. So finally, I got my author that I wanted to look a little bit deeper into. So these were kind of some of my main guiding questions of my research. Who is JWK Kaualilinoe? What did they write about? And why is their work important? So I began researching. Right. So this process, this research process that I'm about to share was outlined by Kumunoinoe in her book. But so this is kind of what I did. So the first thing I did was ohi. I collected. Right. So I went through all of the Hawaiian language repositories and I collected everything that I could find on that Kaualilinoe wrote and everything that was written about Kaualilinoe. I began with the Kamaakamahiai story. And I was looking in every available newspaper from at least 20 years prior to of the story and 20 years after. Once I collected everything, I retyped it, right? Kiko. And the reason why I had to retype it, as you can kind of see in this photo here, this image is a digitization of one of his news articles. And you can see there's this kind of rip that goes right through the story, and some of the text gets kind of can't see some of the text kind of that good, right? So retyping it kind of helped. And then here's another example where you can kind of make out the text here, but it kind of just gets really can't read it at all here. And for those who in the room who have worked with Hawaiian language resources, your eyes start becoming very accustomed to kind of reading kind of this area and kind of making out what this means, right? So this is the kind of material that I was working with, right? And it really sort of represents, again, one, our need to redigitize the Hawaiian language newspapers, but it also represented the area. It showed me the areas in which I needed to go do deeper research in the archives to go look at the actual newspapers. Yeah. So once I did all of that, I read everything. I read it again and I read it again and I read it several times, right? And I also read the articles that were within the same issue that these articles were published in the Hawaiian language newspapers. I also looked at following newspaper publications to kind of see if anybody responded to some of the writings that Kaualilinoe did. So from all of this reading and research, I collected some kind of big picture facts, and I'll share them right now. And so the first one is he inoa makapeni, right? So he had an inoa makapeni, which is a pen name, right? We'll talk about this pen name in a little bit. And so again, the pen name is JWK Kaualilinoe. He was largely active in the newspapers between 1865 and 1880, and he published in Keʻelikōlani, Nūpepa and Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. One of the places that you see him most associated with is Luheikawai, Manoa, and he's often will sign that place under his name after completing an article. Yeah. So one of the kind of things that I'm kind of sad about is I wasn't able to get any sort of good images that really represents who Kaualilinoe was. But when I was at the Bishop Museum doing research on him, I found this image. And this image is of Manoa in 1865, and it's painted by Enoch Wood Perry. And I stood there and looked at it and thinking about this is possibly the time and the space and what the place that Kaualilinoe wrote in. Yeah, so this is Manoa in 1865. Looks vastly different than it does than Manoa does today. Yeah. So anyway, in my research, I've collected 40 articles written by Kaualilinoe of various lengths. Of these 40, 30 of them were mo'olelo kahiko, or stories of the past, and this was probably his most significant contributions. 6 of them were ho'ike mana'o, or opinion-based sort of articles. 2 are ho'olono nuho, or about the news. There's one really fantastic article about a nane, or a riddle. We'll talk about a little bit later. And also Moolelo aina, or story of place, right? So he talks about Manoa. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I found that Kaualilinoe was a pen name. His real name is never revealed, and he publishes an article, right? That is this very cryptic riddle. And this article is in response to the questions by readers about his true identity. About his true identity, right? Trying to figure out who Kaualilinoe truly was. So in this nane, he challenged his readers to solve it, and in solving it, they would find out what his real name is. So I solved it. It was a really hard nane. But it unfortunately doesn't reveal his real name. The answer is Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. Spoiler alert, right? Ko Hawaii Pai Aina, which happens to be the newspaper in which the nane was published in. You know, and of course, this might give us some clues, but who his identity is. But I became super invested and almost hell-bent in finding out who Kaualilinoe was. And I was actually kind of frustrated that I wasn't able to find an answer about his true identity. I went through land records, I went through maps, I went through directories, I went through taxation records. I looked up every single person in Manoa around that time that he was writing that had the name Kaualilinoe or JWK or JW as the initials, and I couldn't find anything that made a solid connection between two Kaualilinoe. So again, in thinking about the purpose of this work, my purpose was to honor and share about Kaualilinoe, right? And my bigger intent was, if I found his family, I wanted to give all of this stuff to them, right? So I think that kind of added to my frustration because I just wanted to do good, right? But I remember this clearly, right? I was sitting in one of my grad classes, and we were all talking about our projects, and I shared my frustration, and I felt that I kept hitting dead ends, and perhaps almost at a point where I felt like maybe I should just give up and find another author who didn't have a pen name, right? So I remember this, yeah. So one of my kumu of this class, she says to me in Hawaiian, and she says, I wonder if you're not finding anything because what you're doing is too maha'oi, right? So maha'oi is a term that we may have heard before, but maha'oi kind of gives this idea of putting your nose where it doesn't belong, right? So this kumu kapa Olivera, she reminded me that there was a reason Kaualilinoe wanted to use a pen name. And for me, that was a huge aha moment, right? So from this understanding that there was a reason that Kaualilinoe used a pen name and never revealed his identity, that really had a major change in the direction of this thesis, and it affected subsequent choices of my research and my writing. And we'll take a look at some of those choices very soon. Okay. So I collected, in collecting and analyzing all of Kaualilinoe's articles, these are just some, okay? Just some of the topics that I pulled from his writings. And I'll share some of them today, yeah. So my research and analysis of Kaualilinoe and his writings are organized in 4 chapters within my thesis. And of course, it is wrapped between an introduction that sort of sets the stage of this research, and a conclusion that explores the possibilities, really, of future work. So in the first chapter that I called E Kukiniana I Kaloa a Mikalaula na Atikalaana I Kakawai, this first chapter is an overview of the articles he wrote, what he wrote about, when he wrote them, and it really is looking at the depth and the breadth of his work. One of my favorites things that he wrote that I analyzed in this chapter is an article entitled No Manoa Ame Konamau Hi'ohi'ona, Manoa and its features. So he writes about this famous saying that I hear all the time, and you will often hear, especially in Manoa, And it goes, "Ua hoʻi kau ʻio Mānoa ua ahiahi." Yeah, so this short story that you guys see here talks about how some of the chiefs would leave the beach early before all the other chiefs sort of finished surfing, for they were too lazy to return the shared surfboards to its proper place. So this sort of phrase, again, is used widely today, especially by those who are connected to Manoa, whether it's the university campus or some kind of place in Manoa, but you hear it often said by them to represent their deep connection to Manoa. Yeah. They will often cite the work of Mary Kavenapukui, right? Her collection on ʻōlelo Noʻeau. So in ʻōlelo Noʻeau, e hoʻi kau ʻio Mānoa ua ahiahi is ʻōlelo Noʻeau number 285. And this article on Manoa and its features by Kaualilinoe was actually translated by Mary Kavenapukui and is housed within the Hawaiian Ethnographic Notes collection at the Bishop Museum. So it might then be likely that Kaualilinoe's story is the source for this ʻōlelo Noʻeau that Pukui collected and has in her ʻōlelo Noʻeau book. All right. So chapter 2, Ka'ihu Kai'aea o Lihue Kauai no Kalelealuaka. Chapter 2 first kind of looks at Kaualilinoe's first serialized traditional mo'olelo called Moolelo o Kalelealuaka. Kalelealuaka, in very brief, is this hero of supernatural strength. So the story is published in April 9th to June 4th in 1870, and it's published in 9 installments in the Nūpepa Ku'oko'a, in a newspaper called Nūpepa Ku'oko'a. So this is the first documented version that I could find of Kalelealuaka. I think here is a very important spot to kind of mention the infamous Nathaniel Bright Emerson. So he publishes an English version of Kalelealuaka in 1907 in Hawaiian Folk Tales, edited by Thrum. So neither Emerson or Thrum mentions that it is a translation, but by just doing a quick glance, without even doing any sort of deep analysis, you can tell that Emerson's work is an exact translation of Kaualilinoe's. Emerson never credits Kaualilinoe at all. And as we know, to today's standards, this is a highly unacceptable practice of plagiarism. In this chapter, in this mo'olelo of Kalelealuaka, one of my favorite topics to kind of to think about and to look at is this idea of time. So in reading this story, I noticed that Kaualilinoe had this almost intentional use of time, right? So he used several phrases that talked about how Kanaka accounted for the passing of time, right? Again, so this perhaps is telling us truly what the true meaning of Hawaiian time is, right? So in these 9 installments of Kalelealuaka, there are 29 examples of how Hawaiians spoke about time. So one of them, this image here, it's a map that I pulled from Google Earth, and so in the story, Kalelealuaka and his crew are heading down from Waipi'o. This is Waipi'o on Oahu. They're heading down from that area and they're heading towards Ko'olina to meet with Kakuiheva, who's one of the famous chiefs of Oahu, if not probably one of the most famous chiefs on Oahu. So as they're heading down from Waipi'o area, right, to Ko'olina, they're led by Maliu Ha'aino, or Maliu Ha'aino, who is a trusted intimate of Kakuiheva. So it is said in the story that Maliu Ha'aino is said to be o'opa, o'opa meaning crippled or perhaps having some kind of feet injuries. So as they're making their way down really slowly, right? And Kalelealuaka looks at the sky, and this position here that we see this map in is perhaps, again, making a guess, kind of where Kalelealuaka them are heading towards Ko'olina. So he looks to the sky and he sees and he says in frustration, "Ke kokokea kula kala I pu'uku'ua he po valeno I koi." Seeing that the sun is nearing Pu'uku'ua, which is a land feature in this area, he knows that it will soon be night. So as he knows, right, that they will be walking through the dark if they don't speed it up. So this phrase here, ke koke akula kala I pu'upu'ua, is perhaps then for the people that lived in this area and continue to live in this area of Waipi'o, this daily meeting of the sun with pu'upu'ua is a marker of time, right? The closer the sun gets to pu'upu'ua, the sooner it will become night. This is kind of another favorite example of mine. And this example really made me think of one strategy that we use today to tell time, right? Of course, so we tell time with a clock, right? But kind of one way that we use to tell time, for many of us at least, we associate the crow of a rooster to mean early morning or dawn, or it could also mean the rooster is crazy, right? Going off in the middle of the night. But in this example here, Kaualilinoe uses 3 phrases of time to mark midnight. So he says, "Ai kia moai ina ana kaleo ka ua'u a huli no ho'i kai'o kapo," right? So at aumoe, or at midnight, the ua'u, which is this bird here, it's a kind of storm petrel, will make a sound when it is midnight, right? So when you hear this bird in the evening, it is an indicator of midnight. On top of that, he says, "Ahuli no ho'i kai'o kapo," and also when the fish of the night or in the sky will turn. So i'a is our phrase that we use for fish, or generally any kind of creature that lives in the water. But i'a is also the term for the Milky Way, right? So when the Milky Way turns, it's kind of the sign that we know that it's midnight. So midnight for Hawaiians, for our kupuna, was told by the u'ina, or the sound of this storm petrel, and when the fish of the sky turned. Yeah. Chapter 3, called Kanyuhi Ai Humuhu o Kahului Imaui no Kamaakamahiai. This chapter continues on and looks at the second serialized traditional mo'olelo, the story Moolelo o Kamaakamahiai, published almost immediately after when Kalelealuaka story ends. So similar to Kalelealuaka, Kamaakamahiai is also a hero of supernatural abilities. So this story is published in June 1870 to January 21st, 1871, and it appears in 21 installments in Nūpepa Hu'oko'a. So Kamaakamahiai, as I said, he has supernatural powers of strength and shape-shifting. He has this ability to lele. Lele can mean to jump, it can mean to fly, and he can kind of lele from island to island. So whether that means jumping from island to island or flying from island to island, right? He can do that. One of the really cool things is that he has this ancestral club that he gets from his kupuna, and it's called kuka'o'o. And it's said to be at least 40 feet long. Okay, and he can fold this club. In the mo'olelo, it says 6 times. This club is also supernatural in the fact that it has also a human body form. So Kamaakamahiai, with this sort of supernatural ability, has also the ability to conquer the islands, but he never does. He's kind of seen as a savior. He's called upon by the individual island kingdoms and different district island chiefs to help defend their aina, their lands, against rebellion chiefs and other mystic beings. So one of the amazing topics that comes from this mo'olelo that I talk about in my thesis is entitled Kokokomo Wamo Mahu Nei Iloko Kiana. Right. So this section here looks at this battle that Kamaakamahiai has on Kauai. So this battle here is one with these 2 incredible beings, and they have this they have this supernatural strength. And one thing that Kaualilinoe makes sure to mention is that they are also mahu, right? And so one of the ideas here of mahu, right? Again, we translate mahu as there's different terms. One of them is homosexual, right? But these mahu of Kauai, they wield a hohoa as their weapon of choice, and so this is kind of an image that that I'm using for the hohoa. So a hohoa here is not traditionally a weapon. It's an implement used in kapa making, right? And so in making clothing or things of that kind of nature, right? So the story here is about Kamaakamahiai's battle with these mahu, and it's kind of an intense battle, and it's probably one of Kamaakamahiai's most difficult battles because these mahu are just so powerful. But what I really like about it is that this story here represents one of the few traditional known stories that we have about mahu, right? I think one of them, probably the most widely known nowadays, because of some of the work of other Kanaka scholars, is Kapai Mahu in Waikiki. Yeah, the stones there. Yeah. So in chapter 4, the last chapter, in this chapter, it kind of paints a picture of Kaualilinoe. In this chapter here, I kind of I re-examine really his writings to have a deeper understanding of who he was as a writer. So as J.W.K. Kaualilinoe, not his true identity behind the paper and the pen, but in a sense, this chapter is meant to be his biography as a writer. Okay. So I know many of you guys are probably sitting in the audience and you're thinking, okay, well, that's kind of an odd place for a biography. I think many times you see a biography towards the front. And this is a question that I got as well from some of my kumus. Like, why did you decide to put the biography in the back? Well, so this is one of the choices that I made because of this idea of maha'oi and not wanting to be maha'oi, right? So because Kaualilinoe used a pen name, fame and recognition for his writings was probably not his priority. So to kind of honor this idea, what I did instead is I really wanted to forefront and focus largely on why his writings are important for this study, important really for us to study. You know, really looking at what are some of the things that we can learn from him about our history, about our culture, about our language, and really about ourselves. Okay. So from reanalyzing his work, I was able to find some information about who he was, again, as a writer. Again, this is kind of where we have that line that's kind of drawn between maha'oi and not being maha'oi. The reason being is that all this information that I've collected and I'm presenting here and then shared in my thesis, all of this information is, as one of my kumu puts it, noa, right? It's published in public forum for public consumption. So these are not any of his personal records, anything that comes from personal things, right? Everything comes from public record. So when looking at Kaualilinoe, we know that he signed from Manoa, right? So which probably meant he lived there, or he wrote from there at least. Because he knew traditional stories of Manoa and he cared very deeply about that place, we could say he grew up there or at least lived there for some time. He may have been involved with a church in Manoa or in the area, just based on the particular kinds of writings that he did. Some of the writings that he did was made reference a lot to the Bible. And we also know that he's a kane oya. He's male. So how do we know that he's male, right? So in the first thing that he published that I could find, it's a letter, and he writes directly to an audience, and he says, "E o'u kai kuahine o Hawaiʻi o Keawe I Miloa," right? So here, this phrase kai kuahine kind of tells us what his gender is. So here, we know that so I should talk about this term kai kuahine a little bit. So kai kuahine, it means sister or female cousin of a male. right? So in the Hawaiian language, kaikuahine is generally a term that is only reserved for kane, that kane can use this term when referring to a sister or a female cousin. So for this reason, we know that Kaualilinoe is male. Okay. So we also know about him that he was well versed in mo'olelo, right? He knew mo'olelo about Manoa. He knew the mo'olelo of Kalelealuaka. He knew mo'olelo about Kamaakamahiai. Again, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but Kamaakamahiai, his version is the first recorded version that I've been able to find. One of the cool things that he did, one of his writings is this kind of really neat analytical comparison between 5 traditional mo'olelo and 5 stories from the Bible. And what he kind of says in this, for example, he says, if the story of Jonah and the whale is true according to the Bible, why then is our story of Kukui Pahu being swallowed by a great fish also not true? So this kind of this kind of thinking about our mo'olelo and its position that it has in society and the way that we view mo'olelo really tells me that he was of course, a Kanaka intellectual. Yeah. So Kaualilinoe's stories seem to be very popular. Most times they're printed in the prime spot on the newspaper. That's the front page. However, at the height of the Franco-Persian War in 1870, the story of Kamaakamahiai was pushed to the last page for a few installments and returned to the front of the page until it finished. In the very last paragraph, Kaualilinoe says in this quote right here that we're looking at, he says, "E aho nui no ike kako ike keiki I oiaku o kahai pule a me ka mana o kupa a luli ole ona ho'o vale o ke ao. A I noho pu no ho'i kako I ka ua ma'akua o Hauʻula. A inu pu no ho'i I ka awa ko liko o kai mano I kai popa'u." So here, in this quote, what he's doing is he's promising his readers another mo'olelo will be published very soon. So be patient for that. A few months go on and no story is published. However, in April 27, 1871, in a competing newspaper, Keʻelikōlani, J.W. Puamana publishes a letter. Okay? J.W. Puamana publishes a letter. And I found this letter because, as I shared, I literally went through all of the newspaper databases and I was looking for every single person that was connected to Manoa that had the initials JWK or JW to figure out what the identity of Kaualilinoe was. So this letter that Puamana writes is addressed to the general readership, and it's talking about the seriously falling standards of Nūpepa Ku'oko'a, and he encourages the readers to instead to subscribe only to the competing newspaper, Keʻelikōlani. In the letter, Puamana specifically points out the story of Kamaakamahiai, and he says that these were the best days of the newspaper. When stories like this were published in Nūpepa Ku'oko'a, that was the best. Yeah. Puamana then signs this letter with Luheikawai as his place. The only other individual that I've seen this place associated with is Kaualilinoe, right? So the editor of Nūpepa Ku'oko'a responds a few weeks later. They never mentioned the name, but they say in this response that the person who wrote this letter in Keʻelikōlani, that being Puamana, was previously a story writer for Nūpepa Ku'oko'a, but is angry because his request to publish another story was rejected. So then, possibly, it is likely that Puamana is Kaualilinoe. However, I have not been able to find any information on J.W. Puamana. And if Puamana is indeed Kaualilinoe, this sort of urge to want to fight for a place of mo'olelo in newspapers shows Kaualilinoe's commitment to mo'okuʻauao consciousness and preserving mo'olelo for our benefit today. So unfortunately, I could not find any story about in any newspaper or any other kind of resource that made reference to these last lines that Kaualilinoe shared that talked about this story that Kaualilinoe wanted to publish. I do hope that the story or the stories is kind of buried somewhere in some archive waiting to be rediscovered and not forever forgotten for not being published. After this, neither Keʻelikōlani or Nūpepa Kuʻokoʻa published a Moolelo Hawaiʻi. Keʻelikōlani closed in 1873, and Nūpepa Kuʻokoʻa didn't publish another Moolelo Hawaiʻi until 1876. So, taking a look at Kaualilinoe post 1880, Kaualilinoe kind of disappears. I couldn't find any writings about him. I couldn't find anything else that he wrote, and I also couldn't find any deaths that kind of coordinated with his disappearance as well. However, because we did see that Kaualilinoe used at least two different names in the newspapers, it could be likely that he did continue writing, but under another name. Yeah. So here, this research not only honors Kaualilinoe's work, but it also repositions his important work directly in front of us as contemporary scholars and researchers of Hawaiian knowledge. Like the rain that feeds the streams, the aquifers, the lands, and the oceans, Kaualilinoe's work feeds us and our own consciousness about Hawaiian thought and the perspectives on culture and language. This work also outlines and provides examples of our ethical duty and responsibility to our kupuna when we are researching them and the knowledge that they shared with us. All right. So, me mana'o, mahalo nui ya ʻoukou pakahi apau I ka kamalio ana mai I keia wahi haʻi ʻōlelo nei. Thank you guys all for this time and space for me to share about Kaualilinoe. As I mentioned, this is one of the very first platforms I was able to share this work that I've done in English. So mahalo nui. I am including a QR code here. This QR code, if you're interested, it will take you to my thesis. If you want to look at it, if you want to read it a bit more. If the QR code isn't working for you, you can also take the link that I have here. So Mikela mana'o, mahalo nui he ʻoukou, and I'm open to questions. So mahalo.